Ah, it's good to be back. The Legend of Zelda. What happened to Link Between Worlds? Shut up. No, seriously, my copy has just kind of vanished. Either it accidentally fell someplace and was thrown away, or is buried someplace. After it fell, of course. Either way, I'm going to have to replace it. Until that happens, I decided to skip ahead a little and deal with Ganon one more time. Now, the original Legend of Zelda is an interesting case. I own a copy of the original, but I played this on the Wii U, so I had access to save states. I'll explain why in a bit. However, my first experience with this was actually on the Nintendo GameCube. While it didn't have the Virtual Console, there was a Zelda collection with several Zelda games on it that released for the console. The 2 NES games and the 2 N64 games in one package. And while I had experience with OOT and Majora's Mask, I was rather new to the NES games at the time. I never got very far in the original Zelda. I didn't really try to beat it either, as the game was just hard. 3 dungeons in, and this game suddenly became a beast. Yeah, this game kicked my ass so hard in the 3rd dungeon, I rarely tried beating it. I got to the 3rd dungeon, got destroyed, and that was it. Regardless, this isn't the first time I heard about this game. I had some bed sheets on my Mario bed sheets, you know. One side was Mario, the other side was Zelda. I had that when I was growing up. I had an old Nintendo Power talking about it as well once. But I thought Zelda was a girl's game by then. So naive. However, this game's history shouldn't be ignored. What Legend of Zelda did to the adventure genre is incredible, and while the game aged like fruit dropped behind the dryer, this game brought a lot to the table back in the day. But please notice, I did say back in the day. This game is incredibly rough, and while I'm going to try and be nice, this may end up being a bit more of a negative review overall. So let's get this show on the road. Let's do it. Let's take on Ganon! Round 2. Ironic, since this is actually the first time Ganon appeared in the series. So here's the story. Ganon, a pig wizard that isn't fighting a monkey on a go-kart, has returned and Zelda has been captured. He also has a piece of the Triforce, particularly the Triforce of Power. It's up to you to gather up the other Triforce that Zelda broke into pieces and defeat Ganon. Yeah, there's only 2 here. I guess Dual Force doesn't roll off the tongue, though. Don't worry, the next game mentions the 3rd piece, the Triforce of Courage. Anyway, that's the story. Ganon took over the entire country of Hyrule, and Link needs to find some older people. He finds them, some shopkeepers, and manages to slay Ganon with their help. You are in control of the story for better or worse. Look, believe it or not, I don't mind the story. This is indeed the first Zelda game and has the most basic, bare-bones story in the entire series. But being the first, they wanted to keep things simple, probably a lot like Mario. When it comes to NES games, oftentimes I'm kind of looking for how charming the game is compared to the story, and there's a certain nostalgia to these graphics. While it may not be as detailed as Link to the Past, I can still tell what things are supposed to be. I can tell Manhandle is a plant, I can tell Goma is a big-ass spider monster. Overall, I think the graphics work well. Music is great too. That opening theme is just as familiar as ever, and even if this isn't your first Zelda game, it still works well for an opening to a grand adventure. Naturally, I also like the overworld theme, and while I didn't grow up with this until my teens, the dungeon theme fills me with nostalgia as well. Yeah, those are the only themes. Oh, and Ganon's Lair has its own theme, which is tense and dramatic. The sound effects of the gaining items and secrets is certainly familiar. Most of these have been redone and reused over the years, but it's still nice to hear them here. If it isn't broke, don't fix it, right? Still works well overall, and that's great. Okay, let's get into some of the shit here. This gameplay has not aged well at all, and that's part of the reason this game is very rough to play. First thing, Link doesn't swing his sword, he stabs it outright. This guy only thrusts forward, and while you can move around to kind of swing, it isn't very reliable. For the most part, he's frozen when he thrusts, so, yeah, good luck with that. This means you have to be directly facing your opponent, and since Link's sword isn't exactly long, you better get cozy with the enemies, which can deal touch damage. I'm certain you can use other weapons though, right? Sure, mostly. The boomerangs can stun most foes. Once upgraded, it can move across the entire screen. It can even go through objects. Realistically, if you have full health, your sword can also be a long-range weapon as well. It's awesome. You get a bow, which you can buy arrows for that aren't normal items. You lose rupees with every use. Unfortunately, I kind of need that money though, so it's powerful, but it kind of hinders it a little bit. Bombs aren't super powerful, but they hurt numerous foes at once, as well as open secret walls for doors. They are useful, but your ammo for these is incredibly limited. The wizard staff is neat, shoots magic, and eventually can be upgraded to shoot fire as well. This weapon is awesome and was my go-to after acquiring it. You can also get some upgrades to mobility, like a ladder to move across bodies of water. You can also get a raft, but it only is needed for a health upgrade and a dungeon. You can also buy and find defensive rings to increase your defense, and of course, you can increase your attack power as well by upgrading your sword. These go a long way, helping you survive a lot of the bullshit this game expects you to deal with in the upcoming trials to save Zelda. Oh boy, let's talk about Wizrobes and Darknuts. These enemies are often complained about by many Zelda players when encountered, and I never got why. Well, until playing this game, that is. Darknuts are basically tanks. These things are powerful, hit hard, and while I don't get much trouble from the orange-looking ones, the blues, oh, the blue ones. Even with a fully upgraded sword, they take at least 2 hits to slay. And until you have the red ring at the end of the game, they take a heart when they touch you, at the very, very least. Oh, and there's this little time to recover from a hit from an enemy. Since you don't get much time to recover between damage output, yeah, these things can dogpile you, and the game's idea of a challenge is to put 6 of these assholes in a room. Sometimes they can be paired up with other hard-hitting enemies, or enemies that take your sword for a while. They look like little disco balls, I guess. Darknuts are immune to everything but swords or bombs. Bombs take more time and can be difficult to place as Darknuts move randomly and never stop moving, only being predictable when they're chasing you. And last but not least on the Darknut round table, Darknuts can only be harmed from your sword from the side or the back. Link may be faster than these guys, but getting behind them is an absolute pain because you cannot predict their movements very well, and Link is really slow when it comes to his sword fighting. Wizrobes are terrible too. They are about the same as only swords and bombs can harm them, but you can attack them from all 4 sides. That's good, right? Well, they can hit you at a distance though, and the blue ones naturally hit like trains. This, as well as some statues, make some rooms and dungeons almost bullet hells. Yay! There is an insane amount of this shit this game expects you to dodge, and Link doesn't move very well in this game. He either moves up, down, left, or right. I also swear turning in this game is a bit tricky, as there's a slight delay. I got used to it, but it's something to worry about. This game also isn't very generous on giving you fairies or hearts. Hearts are nice, and fairies give you more health, but are rarer. Now, for healing on demand, you need to buy potions. But once you know how to buy them, it's not too bad. Still though, this difficulty with the hard-to-face enemies is relentless. It begins roughly around the 3rd dungeon, and dungeons 5, 6, and 8 are the toughest dungeons ever. Yes, even compared to Dungeon 9, the final dungeon, which is challenging but not terrible overall if you know where to go. Even the boss fights aren't too taxing. Now, that isn't a bad thing since eventually they just kind of start showing up in many of the dungeons. Yeah, there's dungeons with a crap ton of boss fights. There are rooms with Manhandla, Digdogger, and 3 Dodonagos just milling around. Though they aren't super difficult, they can damage Link very considerably. If you die, you start at the dungeon entrance with 3 hearts no matter what, even if you normally have 12 or higher. This means grinding out hearts. Oh, joy! I love grinding in a game. I have found that while enemies in dungeons are indeed supposed to drop hearts, it seems rarer in the dungeons themselves, so oftentimes I end up going back to the overworld. Speaking of the overworld, even finding some of these dungeons is a test of patience and blind luck. They aren't impossible, but trickier than they need to be. Surviving the overworld isn't too bad, but let's look at Dungeon 7 for example. It's hidden underneath this lake that needs the flute, and Dungeon 8's just sitting under a tree. The tree kinda sticks out, mind you, and is near the first part of the game, so you can end up finding this dungeon before even ending up in the first proper dungeon. The overworld also has shops that you'll need. You can buy blue candle as well as meat that you'll eventually need in one of the dungeons and never again. They are expensive though, so be sure you're constantly grinding rupees. You may need them for some of the gear in this game as well. The blue ring for much needed defense boost, bomb upgrades that are just randomly in dungeons, and a better shield cost a lot of money. Luckily, potions are ironically cheap. To get potions, you'll need the letter, which isn't too hard to locate. It's out in the open, in a cave somewhere, and some heart containers are too. Most are very well hidden though. There are plenty of secret rupee stashes and heart containers hidden in mundane scenery. A random tree along a wall of trees, or part of a wall that looks no different than the rest of the freaking wall. There are shops hidden like this too, for the record, that offer discount prices, and even some older ladies selling potions are hidden like this. So, bomb and burn everything? Nope. Some places make you pay for the bush or wall you just destroyed. Lovely. You can't possibly know which ones are traps or even just gambling games. You don't know, at least not on your first playthrough, unless you have a map at the very least. Sadly, the in-game map is just a gray block, so yeah. You also gain sword upgrades oddly too. The old man tells you that you have to master the blade, but in reality you need more health upgraded before you can upgrade your sword. This is confusing and makes building your arsenal and health a bit of a mess, but you need health to help survive and also order to get better swords too. You should also find the power bracelet hidden under a living statue near the graveyard. It's a useful item. It's just kind of there. You wouldn't know which statue. The statue's not just like out in the middle of nowhere. It's with a bunch of other statues for no particular reason. But it helps move blocks to find warps to travel across the overworld a lot easier. And the warp whistle can take you to dungeons that you cleared out. These tricks help you for sure, but finding some of these are an absolute nightmare unless you actually have a map from online. Look, I totally respect the legacy that the original Legend of Zelda has on gaming as a whole. Every open world game owes thanks to this, either directly or indirectly. Skyrim? You bet. Assassin's Creed? Oh yeah. Final Fantasy? Probably. Still, the original game hasn't aged very well. Without outside help, this game won't hold up to modern standards. So that's not good. I recommend people play this for the legacy alone, but if you don't care about that, then this game will seem like a meh game. However, I say without outside help. With some maps of the overworld and maybe the last few dungeons, this turns into a reasonable game to play, and maybe a save state feature to help with the health grind. With these added benefits, the game goes from a meh to a good. That'd be a 5 out of 10 to a 7 out of 10 for those who really like numbers. There's also a decent amount of charm here, and a lot of the trappings in this game are negated by replete playthroughs and memorization. It's a rough start for sure, but people who know this game well often love it, and even do challenges like no sword runs. It is new players that will have the roughest time, but I'm sure with a helpful map or two, you can still overcome. But that's all the time I have to talk about the original Legend of Zelda. If you liked the video, like, subscribe, comment, hit the bell icon, and hopefully soon, I'll also have a review of the other NES game that also happens to be Zelda. Until then, my minions, take care.